And good morning, everyone, and welcome to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. My name is Alexi Boyd, your trusted business advisor, lover of all things admin, and would you believe it, small biz owner myself. Today we've got a fantastic guest, which I'm very excited about and have been looking forward to having on the show. He's one of those people that when you meet are incredibly giving and incredibly generous with their time, their spirit, their energy, and without positioning him as a life coach right now, it's a fantastic position to be in when you meet people like that in business, because they're the people who help you build relationships, and I'm hoping that he's going to give some of that information and expertise to my listeners today. So what we're talking about today is thinking about the future when it comes to your business planning. And I'm not talking about that 30-page document that's sitting in the bottom drawer at the moment, but I'm actually talking about planning for your future. And when we talk about our future, we talk about, of course, our family's future. When did you really think about your long-term plan? How many years are you planning to work for? Are you even putting money aside for your own super? There's a scary thought. As a bookkeeper, I find a lot of people don't even do that because they're self-employed. And is there an end goal? So we have very specific challenges as small businesses. We have, obviously, we know about all the hats we have to wear, the delegation that we have to do but often don't. But something we have to own ourselves and think about ourselves is our financial future. And we're so focused on working on our own business that we don't think about what the next step is in 5, 10, 15 years or what the end goal is. There's a lot of anchors as well. So a well-planned property investment can serve as a bit of a safe point. So you can think about thinking about property investment isn't just, okay, well, I've got to start saving for a deposit. It's more than that. It's a lot more planning and it's a lot more forethought. And that's what today's guest is going to bring to us today. So welcome to the show, Daniel, first of all.
Thank you, Alexi. Lovely to be here.
Now, you work with a great company called DPM, and that's it's funny, though, because when we met and when we chatted about your business journey originally, that's what I find fascinating about my guests is quite often you think, oh, okay, you're a photographer, so you must have been in advertising, and then you got advertising. But the last time I've had people like that on the show, they have completely different journeys that you wouldn't have imagined. Mm-hmm. And what I find fascinating about your small business journey is that you're actually a restaurateur.
Correct.
As well as. So you haven't even put that hat aside. You're like the multitasking king. I mean, I don't know, anyone who is in the restaurant business can do anything but own one restaurant and then sort of struggle through that. But you've got multiple restaurants that you own, plus
I do, yes.
You're very heavily involved in a lot of networking groups.
Absolutely.
So what led you to this journey where you feel that you want to benefit other people with property investment? I mean, that for me, that's just a bit of a disconnect. How did that come into your life?
Yeah, certainly. So I guess my journey started at working for myself about 17 years ago, and I think I started off like a lot of small business owner operators. It wasn't even about the money. I just wanted to work for myself. You know, I didn't like being told what to do, and
I see that in you.
Yeah, you just want to make your mark in the sand, and I didn't really think about what the future would hold, and I thought that hospitality would be something that suited me because it was what I was doing when I was going through university, through my undergraduate and through my postgraduate, and I just thought, yeah, look, I love it. I'm going to do it. And there was some faint idea in the background that I was going to, get rich from this thing, but I never really planned it out. And I actually very quickly discovered that hospitality is one of the most unforgiving industries. I know all of you small business operators out there work incredibly hard, but I can certainly say restaurateurs, bar operators.
I don't think you'll find anybody arguing with that. I mean, that it's a tough industry. It's got the highest failure rate and
Absolutely.
the highest, it's very difficult. And a lot of business owners out there don't pay themselves for many years. They just tread water. But that's not your instance, because you obviously have multiple businesses now. You have multiple restaurants that have been through that process.
I've set up and built up and sold 12 hospitality businesses over the last 17 years. They haven't all been a success. I'm currently sitting at about a 70% success rate. So, there've been a few dozen, a few failures, which I try not to tell too many people about. But
except for the hundreds of people listening.
Yeah. No names will be named today. But I think actually the impetus for me to get into property investing myself and to assist others was the anxiety that I suffered as a result of going through having some bad business decisions and just working incredibly hard in my business. And one of my epiphanies was when I actually started to have some success in my bars and my restaurants and generate a little bit of cash and discover this thing called property, and understanding that I could take the money that I was making from my restaurants and use that to invest. And then having this light bulb moment that my business wasn't actually working in my restaurant businesses just to make money. It was actually using that as a vehicle to generate income to then build real assets. So I think it was that light bulb moment that I had, and that would have been probably about 8 years ago now, and starting my investing journey, that's given me the desire to want to help other people. I see so many people struggling, not just in hospitality, in lots of different businesses, and I just think if I could help to take you on a journey like I've been on myself, that would really be of some use. So
the thing that I find the disconnect, I mean, obviously you're incredibly driven, and you strike me as someone who would be an incredibly good manager. So I know that 70% success rate would have a lot to do with the way you manage your people. And I'm just going to share a little moment that we had over drinks that time when we had our meeting. And there was a lovely moment where one of your head waiters came over just to check on us and see if we needed anything. But you could instantly see that rapport. And so I believe that, in hospitality, you have to have obviously that rapport with your staff and make sure that you hang on to them and that they feel loved and nurtured. Is that something that you bring to the business world when you're making those connections that I mentioned at the beginning of the program? I
think anyone that's really got a bigger vision for their business, I think they are doing that, absolutely.
And that's part of the success, that 70% success rate.
Certainly,
Just certainly not across the board with hospitality by any means.
Of course, yeah. I've got 46 staff across 2 businesses at the moment. This is outside of my work with DPN, outside of my property work. And I knew quite a while ago that if I was going to be able to fulfill my vision and get to my end goal, I would need to give my team ownership, and that was the start of that process. Is just having this idea that all the ideas shouldn't be mine, all of the direction shouldn't be mine. In fact, the more that I would give to my team, to my management, to my exec chefs, the more they'd take that and run with it and make it their own. And now they're not working for a paycheck; they're working because it's their baby. And I see myself in the business as more of just a guide and a mentor now, and I spend maybe a couple of hours on a Monday and a couple of hours on a Friday with my team, and it's more just standing on the sidelines like a coach more than anything, and allowing them to do what they do really well. And
that's fantastic, just sharing with us some of those insights into managerial styles, because I think that's when we're out of the corporate world, or we've had a nasty experience in the corporate world and been poorly managed, which is half the reason why a lot of people leave. It's nice to hear that you can share with us some of those managerial techniques as a small business owner, because we all look after contractors and some of us look after staff, and there's no reason why you can't bring them into that journey with you and
absolutely
not be a complete control freak.
And and they don't need to be a direct employee either. I mean, I know there are a lot of small business owners who have sub 10 employees or even sub 5 employees, but it's still important to have this idea that you delegate to the people that do it the best, and that might mean outsourcing, for example. Instead of answering the phones yourself, you send that to someone else that does it well and also cares to do it well, because that's their bread and butter. It might go to an independent contractor that just works part-time. And it might be just something as simple as outsourcing your bookkeeping to an expert that really loves to do that. They wake up and they live, eat and breathe.
Those crazy
fantastic
people.
Yeah. Delegating, outsourcing and empowering. I guess that'd be
definitely.
Now,
just take me back a little bit, because you mentioned before that there was that starting point, that nugget and that moment. And I think that maybe a lot of small businesses are sort of sitting there going, I'm just waiting for that moment to hit me. I'm just waiting whether or not there's an opportunity that I find out about magically about a piece of property that's definitely going to, or is it because I've got to start working on my nest egg and I've got to have some money in the bank to get started. Where does that ball start rolling? Is it meeting the right people? Is it connecting with the right DPNs of the world or whatever it is? How does that small business owner make that huge leap of faith and just saying, okay, I think property investment, for example, is the way to go, and this is how I'm going to start the journey? Because I think that first step is always the most difficult.
Certainly. I think baby steps is incredibly important. It's what we do on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis to want to make ourselves better and make our businesses better. But I also think I would say if there's one thing that we could do today to make tomorrow better, it's allocating the first part of our day to plan. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half an hour. And it means thinking, what do I want tomorrow? Today I'm going to plan not just for the rest of my day, but tomorrow and next week. And extrapolating that out as far as you possibly can, and then looking at, what do I want in 1 year? What do I want in 5 years? The question that I most love to ask my clients is, where's this whole thing going? And then the response is normally follows this progression. The first thing they say is, oh, well, this week I'm doing this. And I'm like, no, more, further, longer. Like, let's talk about bigger than that. Then they go, well, this year I want this. No, give me more. Tell me about your longest, best possible timeline. And then they tell you what they really, really want, which is they want to retire at 55 instead of 65. They're mad golfers and they've got this dream to play on every, the top 12 best courses in the world, or they're fishermen and they want to buy a, 28-foot cruiser and just spend 4 days fishing. And it's when you get to those questions, to the really to the heart of the matter, and they say, this is what I want as a lifestyle, then you can start to build backwards from that. And it's like, well, let's put a cost to that. What's it going to actually cost you to have this lifestyle, to take your wife away for 3 months of the year, staying
or your husband.
Or your husband. Absolutely. What does that lifestyle look like? Let's really put that vision up on the board and let's break that down and monetize it. And now we're doing some really good work here because you've got people actually thinking now, oh, well, this is going to cost real money. And here I am working for myself, thinking, well, yeah, it's great. I'm working for myself. No one tells me what to do, and I'm trying to get rich, but I haven't really mapped out how I'm going to get to that number in 15 or 20 or 25 years' time. And I think that is the most important thing right now. And you don't need to think about property or shares or whatever your thing is. The most important thing is beginning with the end in mind and having that idea of where the journey ends, how it looks like for you, and what it's going to cost you.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to take a quick break here on Small Biz Matters. You're listening to myself, Alexi Boyd, here on Triple H 100.1 FM. And after the break, we're going to talk a little bit more about property investment and what that step-by-step process is and what you need to have in place before you start making that journey. You're listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. So let's get back to the program today. We've got a fantastic guest here, Daniel. Just before the show, we were talking about the importance of understanding how property investment works as a small business owner and thinking about the end goal in mind. Daniel was sharing with us his journey of being a restaurateur of all things, and having a very high success rate with his business and his work, which is super exciting. So Daniel, let's go through the process of, you've made that decision. You've gone, okay, I want to retire in 25 years. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming everyone here who's listening is 30. Let's be more realistic. I want to retire in 20 years because I'm more like 35, 45. And do you sit there, and I can only do this with spreadsheets. I'm sorry, I am a bookkeeper. Do you sit there with the spreadsheets, you count out the weeks from when you literally want to retire and then go, there's the weeks, this is what you earn now, this is what you've got to put aside, this is when you need to make that investment happen, if it's not happened already. And this is where the projections happen. I mean, who has all that data?
You make it sound so difficult, Alexi.
It's because I said the word spreadsheet, because your brain went, oh my God, no spreadsheet.
I know, as soon as you think about a spreadsheet, your brain just stops working. That is essentially what we do, and I guess to do that across everything, you really want to have a financial planner there. But certainly with respect of just focusing on property, it is a little bit easier than that. There are some basic numbers that we want to work with here. And the first number that we want to work with is understanding what our asset base is now, an asset being an investment property, and understanding what that's going to be worth in the future. And it increases over time due to this wonderful thing we have in Australia called inflation.
Yeah, and crazy property prices.
And then we also want to understand what our return is going to be on that asset, and return being the rental income that we get minus any expenses that we have, and how that also grows over time, because you're a good landlord, but you put your rent up at least alongside CPI every year. And then you look at that asset in 25 years' time and you say, well, that returning me an average return of 4%, which is a number sort of like a realistic number.
Is it conservative?
I think it's a conservative number.
I'm a fan of conservative planning.
Yeah. I've heard that if you've got a portfolio returning you 6%, you're really outperforming the market.
Okay.
But I think long term over, and I mean 20, 30, 40 years and beyond, if you use the number 4%, that's after all of your costs. I think that's kind of like a realistic conservative number to work with. So if you can imagine, a common number that my clients come up with that I'd like to retire on is, say, $1,000 a week as passive income that they're getting.
Yep.
So that's going to work out to $52,000 a year, which you're looking at about what are we looking at? So in today's terms, that's about $1.3 million worth of property. But of course, in 20 years' time, taking inflation into play, it's going to be almost double that. So you're never going to save there, right? I'm never going
to have $2.6 million in the bank.
If you divide that by 25 years, I think it works out to be maybe $80,000 or $90,000 a year. My maths isn't very good on the fly like that. You just can't save that sort of money. So the idea is to get that asset under your belt as soon as you can, and let the power of time do all of the heavy lifting for you, and just make sure that the return that you're getting on that asset as it grows, you're also putting your rent up as well. And you'd be surprised, you only really need, to get to quite a healthy number, you only really need maybe one investment property now and maybe one in your self-managed super fund a little bit later on down the track when you've been building that up to a healthy level. When you've been paying
your own super.
When you've been paying your own super, and I think we're going to talk about that in a little bit. And all of a sudden you've got a nice, healthy, passive income there.
So at the beginning you mentioned the importance of understanding what your abilities are. Now, you can't do that unless everything's up to date. And I mean, so many times people approach good accountants or good bookkeepers and say, I'm completely behind. So this is not something you can even get your head around until you've got all of your BASs up to date, your taxes done. I mean, I know a lot of small businesses say, well, I've got until the following May to get my tax done. That's nuts.
That is.
I mean, you've just got, if you're up to date with your BASs and everything is locked in and you've done it as accurately as possible, and apart from the creative accounting that accountants do at the end of the financial year, why don't you just hand it over? So
Absolutely.
I think, in a way, the BAS process is actually a bit of a gift. I keep saying this to my clients. It's a good thing because it forces you to keep everything up to date. And that's crucial in order to understand what your financial position is, in order to be able to understand what you're capable of in terms of these investments. Now, the way you were talking before, you made it sound like, oh, okay, you buy the property and then you have some expenses, but generally that's covered. You still need to be prepared for when there's a rainy day, when you don't have tenants or something goes amiss or...
Certainly.
Yeah. How do you factor that into the calculations?
I think you use the perfect language. It's a rainy day fund, You just, again... Being small business owners, we need to be very mindful of our resources and our finances, and it's just about having a certain amount of your holdings, and they can sit in your offset account as well. But you've got a certain amount of cash that's sitting there at all times, and think about the worst case scenario. All of my tenants move out of all of my properties tomorrow and no one moves back in for 3 months. And
that's how you get the number. You literally go, all my tenants are out, multiply that by the 3 months of rent I have to cover.
Yeah.
What about if there's any major maintenance? Should you also be putting aside things for like a sinking fund for your property as well?
So I'm a very big advocate of not buying old property.
Okay.
I've seen too many people buy that, beautiful dream little terrace place down in, insert beautiful inner west suburb here or lower North Shore suburb here, and the dream looks fantastic from the outside, and then you find out you've got concrete rot, or you find out you've got rising damp or termites, or those things that slug you for $5,000 or $10,000, and they've literally can wipe out years of earnings, of income. So the best way to remediate that is to buy new or close to new if you can.
Okay, so are you a fan of Off the Plan? I just made a fan of Off the Plan.
I wouldn't necessarily say I'm a fan of Off the Plan units in major cities where there's a large oversupply.
Yep.
But certainly I do love land and build in upcoming suburbs where, state government's putting in lots of infrastructure and there's a massive jobs boom.
That magic I word, infrastructure.
Yeah.
Who'd have thought it? Planning.
Oh, I can see we're going to get off topic now.
Yeah. It's only because I live in Mount Colah that I'm having a bit of a rant.
Yeah, but it's really important to understand the great Australian dream is still alive, and people want a front yard, a backyard, a dog, a veggie patch, and they don't want to pay ridiculous city prices for a shoebox. And that is actually a statistical fact, because you can see this mass migration to areas where there is still land available, and you can still purchase a family home around that median, and the median being, that $500 to $700 range, not the $1 million or more that Sydney house prices still are. And, that's what's driving the volume and driving the growth in these suburbs. And then you can see well, theoretically, the infrastructure's going now. It is. There's rail projects and there's road projects and there's parks and schools and hospitals and Air Force bases and military bases being increasing in size, hospitals doubling in size up in Newcastle, for example. So they're the areas that I like in particular, and also buying new or building in those areas so that we can have something that's going to be headache-free. Because, you know, as a small business owner, the last thing you need to deal is with stuff like that. The
$10,000 or $15,000 bill.
Yeah, and it's just the time as well. It's the stress. An investment should be as stress-free as possible. That's really important. So dealing with that, even if you've got a property manager, it's just not something that should be on your radar.
And that's something that we were talking about in the prep for the show, is that it's really important that you take the emotion out of investing. So on the one hand, as small business owners, we're incredibly passionate about what we do and very, I guess, more emotional than the corporate giants are when it comes to their businesses. You need to be able to take that step back. Would you agree? Absolutely,
yeah. It's wonderful to be passionate about our businesses, and we should certainly never lose that and never treat that as otherwise. It's that passion that actually makes our business great. But the idea of an investment, a property investment, is it's a plan B, and it should be completely rational. You need to just look at the numbers and assess your investment as to how it's performing financially. And an investment property is not something with a white picket fence in a leafy green suburb that, you know, does all of these things, and you know it's close enough that you can drive by so you can check on it, because you know when you look at it, that's what makes the value go up, right?
Yeah, drive-bys.
Yeah, to drive by, you know, the value's just gone up 20% because we go and look at it every weekend. It's not like that at all. It's got to be a completely rational decision based on is this investment going to go up, the capital growth? Can I rent it and can I keep it rented for indefinitely? Is it got appeal? And also, can I get the rental return on it that I expect to not only take care of my costs, but actually to leave me some money left over to pay me some income? And if it doesn't do those things, you know, I don't care whether it's got a picket fence or not. It's not for you.
Well, let's go back right to the beginning. You've made the decision. You've looked through your finances. You've worked out what it is, what your end goal is. You've worked out what you can afford. The big hurdle, and I'm going to say it's absolutely massive for most of us with small businesses. Borrowing.
Yeah.
I mean, the bank looks at us, literally turns around and, you know,
turns their nose up. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know there's more options than just banks. And I guess this is where we start talking about the importance of surrounding yourself with good people.
Yeah.
And I guess a good mortgage broker is what we're leading to here. Is that really what we're talking about?
So you're absolutely right, Alexi. We need to surround ourselves with the best people resources that we have, as well as the best financial resources. That's your bookkeeper and your accountant. You know, have this conversation before you even start your investment journey. Hey guys, I'd like to buy some investment property. We need to make my books look fantastic. I think it's easy for us small business owners to be preoccupied with tax minimisation and hiding money so we don't pay taxes.
Yeah.
And that will come back and bite you in the backside when you need to borrow money. So you speak to your accountant, your financial planner, your bookkeeper, and you say, let's get this business looking tidy. Let's make it presentable so that when a lender has a look at us and gets their feeble, non-small business oriented minds around our books, we look appealing. So they're the first people to speak with. The second one is a fantastic mortgage broker that understands the needs of a small business person, and they'll do things like they also understand how to explain to a lender how to do things like adding depreciation on your plant and equipment back as income, which a lot of lenders just fail to do. You know, if your return might say that you have, you know, written off $50,000 in equipment, for example. Now that's actually money that it's actually sitting on your balance sheet as an asset, but a lot of banks look at it and go, oh well, they've lost that money. And you haven't lost that money at all. So a really good small business mortgage broker will take care of you in that respect. They'll also go to banks who look at just 1 year of financials. So say, for example, you're in your second or your third year of business and your first year was an absolute disaster, but your second or third year is actually looking quite good now. There are a couple of lenders out there that will just look at that. So that's really important as well, understanding.
But doesn't that mean you need a bigger deposit if they're only looking at I don't know. I just have no clue. I'm like my listeners right now, having no idea about how this works.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are a couple of lenders out there that are very sympathetic and understanding to small business, and there are some that aren't. And I'm not going to name any names
Pity.
here. But you know who you are.
If you're listening. But yeah, I mean, that's the thing, and I think that's the biggest hurdle because, yes, you're absolutely right. We try and minimise tax, but we don't do it with the end goal in mind. So if this is what we're looking at doing, then maybe because we're coming up to May when we're all finally getting around to doing our tax from 16-17, which might I remind everybody was 8 months ago, you're starting to look at your financial position with that in mind, not with I'm trying to minimise the amount that I need to pay the ATO at the end of this.
Correct.
Right.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And yes, unfortunately, a lot of the time that might mean that we do pay more tax. But the question that I ask people is that, would you rather be paying $1,000 tax or $100,000 tax?
Yeah, exactly. And you have to be careful as well because obviously you need to be able to service whatever it is, and you need to have that rainy day amount in your mind as well.
Yeah.
And what are the sort of setup costs? What's that pool of money aside from the deposit, which varies on depending on what type of loan you get? What do you need to have as a starting point? Just as I think, okay, I've got to get an advisor. I've got to get. What are your initial setup costs?
So I'm assuming that all of our listeners out there have a good accountant and a good bookkeeper.
I would like to think so.
Well, they're listening to your program, so so aside from those costs, if you're doing your own research or bringing on an advisor that doesn't charge you for that, it's simply the cost of the property acquisition. So some people like using buyers agents. I'm not particularly a fan of that. It's hard to justify spending $10,000 or $20,000 to access property that you can access for no cost.
Yeah.
Just with some research and some good advice from people that you trust.
Yep.
And then the setup costs, of course, there's the onboarding for the cost of the loan. That can be anything from a small amount to several $1,000s. When you're building, you've got some holding costs. So as you're drawing down on your loan, there'll be a little bit of repayment there to cover the cost of the repayments on the land, and then as your builder is building for you, there'll be a few $1,000s associated like that. That might be somewhere between $8,000 and $15,000 on a $500,000 property.
And we're talking, you've got that vision in mind, or people are looking at land and build packages
I always
at
do.
the moment.
Yeah, I always do. If you're going to something existing, those costs might be less, but then you've also got things like pest control reports and things like that. So things do creep up.
And a question for you. I've always been taught by my dad that if you are ever looking at property, you should never look at strata with a building that has a pool and a lift in it.
That sounds like very wise advice from your dad there.
Well done, Dad.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good one, Dad.
Okay,
Absolutely.
so you have to look at your long-term strata costs if you are looking
Absolutely.
at...
They're costs that add to the amenity of your tenant, which is fantastic because you want to have a happy tenant. But I think it's safe to say that those pools and spas and saunas and gymnasiums, they just don't get used.
No, exactly. And they're just,
they're
white
just sitting there, and it's costing you, the owner, money.
Yeah.
I think that's something to be very careful of.
But something that perhaps strata units do well, which is some sort of a sinking fund, that's where you kind of do need to think, I just need to put something aside, either for the fact that the tenant's not there or for some major repairs or something like that.
Yeah. The biggest money burner that I see, existing and past clients getting into other investments is they'll go into an old property, they haven't gone back and looked through enough of the history of the strata, and then they just don't realise that there are a whole bunch of inherent issues there.
Yeah, like concrete cancer.
Like concrete cancer.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're putting in $15,000 a year for the next 5 years.
Yes, when there was no sinking fund previous
when
to
there was no, or there just wasn't enough money in there because no one had planned for it.
Yep.
And then that's also this also snowballs because now you've got 3 or 4 people in your building who can't afford to pay that money, so then they'll try and sell, and now all of a sudden the whole apartment block's got just a whiff about it, and there go your chances of trying to sell and make a profit.
Yeah,
if that's what you wanted to do. So yeah, it's look, in general, apartments, older apartments, and especially off the plan apartments, there's certainly not for me. I'm not saying they're not for everybody. It's plenty of people have done very well out of purchasing apartments off the plan or otherwise. But there are a lot of things to be aware of.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic advice. We're going to go to a quick break here on Triple H 100.1 FM. When we come back, we're going to dive into the world of self-managed super funds, using that money to purchase property. Just a couple of top-line issues that you need to be aware of. You are listening to Triple H 100.1 FM. My name is Alexi Boyd. We'll be back after this. And welcome back to Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it. My name is Alexi Boyd, and if you've missed any of today's show, which, by the way, has been fascinating, you can catch up on our blogs and podcast page on smallbizmatters.com.au. And another great way to get in touch is via our Facebook page. We'll let you know when the podcasts become available, and there's also some really fantastic articles and top tips from yours truly, as well as the usual cohorts of SMH, etc. So we try and keep you informed as small business owners, which is what the show's all about, small business education and helping you on your journey. Now, today's journey, we're speaking with Daniel Sofo, who's talking about the journey he's been on from a restaurateur many moons ago, which he's still continuing on with, buying and selling many businesses, and then ultimately thinking about his end goal in mind, which is what we're trying to encourage you to do today, which is thinking about property investment as an option when it comes to what to do with your retirement and how to make sure all that happens. So one of the things I think we're all familiar with as small business owners is self-managed super funds, because I was actually speaking to an accountant earlier this week who said he finds a lot of people who have self-managed super funds are not running it like a business. They don't actually think of outgoings, incomings, balance sheets, and that's actually something they need to do. And he finds that he needs to educate his non-small business owner clients. So there's a sort of a piece of education or a skill that you have as a small business owner that you can automatically apply to your self-managed super fund. So you know what's in there, presuming you've been adding to it, and you've made the sensible decision, which is to have your own self-managed super fund instead of losing 8 to 10% on fees and things like that from the big guys. So you see that as a real asset to be utilised for the purposes of investing. Would you agree?
Absolutely, yeah. In hospitality or food and beverage industry, there is a notorious lack of attention paid to just planning for the future in general, actually. And employers see it as a slight to have to pay superannuation, sometimes to their employees, let alone themselves. And I know there can be a general neglect amongst small business owners to pay themselves last and to put money into their super as a very, very low priority. But certainly when your ship starts to sail right and there's some nice money coming in, it's a great way to minimise tax. The money that you're putting into your superannuation, whether that's your own fund or someone else's fund, one of the big funds, it's taxed at a very favourable rate. But
you've got to make sure it works for you, because if you're sticking it in like a fund of some kind, then you kind of have this assumption that it's going to earn X amount of dollars.
Absolutely.
Even though they have 1,000,001 disclaimers on their ads, you get the feeling that your money will appreciate at a certain level. But if you have a self-managed super fund, you've got to work that, don't you? You can't just expect it to... It's not going to earn any money in the bank.
That's correct, yeah. And, I'm not a financial planner and I'm not an accountant, so... I'm just going to give some anecdotal evidence for myself and a couple of my clients as well for whom an SMSF strategy has worked. But the strategy that I see working for a number of people is they've left their money and topped up their super in a large fund, and over the last 10 years, things have gone quite well, actually, and there haven't been those expenses or that need to keep a very close eye on it. And then when they get to that amount of money where they can use that and invest it in property, and that's about $200,000, that's when they'll roll it into their, into an SMSF and be a little bit more active about it.
Okay.
I think it's a good thing that our government has some really stringent regulations about how we behave with our super. I think that's, it's fantastic that they force us to be diligent and very, very low risk. So the way that we can leverage our super money to make a purchase is much less than just buying a general property. So you can borrow at 80 or 90 or sometimes even more percent LVR with your own money, but when it's your superannuation money, you can only leverage to 60% or maybe 70%.
Is that because the banks look at it more favourably because they see it as a a source that's there and they just look at it as an individual kind of entity, the self-managed super fund itself? They kind of don't pay as much attention to you as they do to the fund.
No, I think it's more they want us to be careful with our money.
Yeah.
So they're not going to lend as much money against our deposit. Also, there are some quite new regulations which say that we must have 10% of our asset purchase price sitting in our self-managed super bank account. So that means, just to break it down, what it effectively means is if you've got $200,000 in super, you can buy a $450,000 property and you'll need $45,000 sitting there in cash as your rainy day fund at all times. Yeah.
Okay, so that's actually part of the regulations.
It's part of the regulations,
That's
I think it is very sensible, actually.
Government doing something sensible.
Yeah. And then it still leaves you around about, sort of close to that 30% cash into the deal, which also will mean that if you've purchased wisely and you're getting a good rental return, that's going to be close to, or hopefully even comfortably, covering your mortgage repayments on that property, which means it will remain a lower stress, a lower stress investment. You don't have to be tipping all of this extra money in your super fund every year just to keep the thing afloat.
But when you put that money into the super fund, like I'm trying to think of it as a practical point of view, you pay the money into the fund so that you've always got that backup there. So you need to continue putting money into the fund, obviously, as a superannuation
Absolutely.
thing.
I think that should be a lifelong good habit to do that.
And you can't draw it out.
You can use it in certain ways.
For the property.
Or for maybe another acquisition down the track.
Yeah, but you're not allowed to use it as cash flow.
It's not a slushy fund.
Yeah.
You can't just decide to go for a holiday to Greece this year. I'll just dip into my self-managed super and off we go.
Yeah, so you still need to be careful about that because there's all the regulations that
It's highly regulated. There is some expense associated to be mindful of, and you're looking at about $1,500 a year to have an independent auditor look over your activity. And it does seem like which is, I guess, like a fee in itself, and it does seem onerous, but it is important,
But that's what I was saying before as well. Is it if you behave and you use it, you keep the books like you would your own business and you keep them up to date, those fees should be relatively minimal because you're not sort of handing over a shoebox of receipts. We know how stupid that is and how much that can cost us with bookkeepers and accountants.
Absolutely.
So don't do the same thing with your self-managed super fund.
Definitely
have it all
not.
running through the one system.
Yeah. Absolutely, and if you can get your bookkeeper to look after all that for you, or you just even put it in Xero or whatever you're using.
Yeah, you can use anything.
You need to pay for a few repairs, or your tenant needs something, or something breaks,
and it's
whatever
all
it is.
there. And then all you do at the end of the year is go, accountant, there it is. Just have a look at it.
Yeah.
So that comes back to what you were saying before the break about keeping everything up to date. So you've got to be mindful, I think, is the takeaway from this section, is that you've got to be mindful of the regulations. You've got to be mindful of what that pool of money that you must keep there, and then also the pool of money that is probably sensible for a rainy day as well. You've got to be mindful that you can't just use it as a slushy fund.
Yep.
And then the additional costs of maintaining that self-managed super fund. And then you've got to invest in a good property that's going to make you money so it accumulates at the rate at which you want
that is the most important
play on all
piece
the
of
golf
puzzle.
courses at the end of the day.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's a pretty good summation of everything we've pretty much covered today, and it's been an incredibly valuable journey, I think. Thank you for sharing with us your journey, your small biz journey. And it'd be great to have you back on the program again. We might dive a little bit into, in a few months' time, we might talk a little bit more about the different types of investment beyond property perhaps, or a little bit more about your journey that you've been on when it comes to investment and how you got to this point, because you didn't talk about your mum. I loved it when we had I came to one of your networking events, and that was a fascinating speech just about how.
But you don't want to see a grown man cry on radio.
Yeah.
So.
Well, you don't, because you don't see anything on radio. Anyway, look, thank you very much for coming on the program. Tell us a little bit about how people can find out more about you if they'd like to learn more about the DPN program and yourself.
Yeah, certainly. Well, I'm always up for a coffee and a chat. I could talk about property investment endlessly, as you can probably tell today. You can reach out to me via email, daniel.sofo@dpn.com.au, or just find me on LinkedIn, Daniel Sofo. My surname is spelled SOFO, like sofa, but with an O at the end. I'd just love to chat with you.
Awesome.
Cheers.
Look, thank you once again for coming on the program. Those of you who missed any of today's show, you can, of course, catch up on our blogs and podcasts page on smallbizmatters.com.au. And don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter because it'll keep you informed on all the events that are going on the Upper North Shore. And if you have an event you'd like us to broadcast for you, then just get in touch via the website and we'll add it to our event calendar. We'll be back next week with a fantastic guest once again. We're in the middle of a guest fest here on Small Biz. You have been listening to Small Biz Matters on Triple H 100.1 FM.